Good evening, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
All right, so tonight we are still in Roanoke, Virginia. We are actually driving down to Greenville, South Carolina in the morning, though. We're going to record an interview down there with Joe Smith from Travel Tax, so that should be exciting. This is another Monday, usually Sunday evening video, but this is a Monday evening video, Travel Therapy Mentor. We do these weekly live videos talking about different travel therapy topics. Tonight we're going to be talking about how we go about avoiding bad experiences as travel therapists. It's something that when we started out, we heard a lot of stories about bad experiences people had as travelers, and something that we were worried about. And still, even now, we hear a lot of negative things from current and prospective travelers about traveling, and we want to talk a little bit about how we've gone about avoiding those bad experiences, because the vast majority of ours have been really good. So Whitney's going to introduce us and talk about some things that are coming up. I'm going to get this video shared in a few different groups, and we'll get into the topic.
All right, guys, welcome. Thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Whitney Aiken.
And I'm Jared Kazaza.
And we are the faces behind the Travel Therapy Mentor site. You guys are coming to us from our Facebook page. You can also find us on Instagram at Travel Therapy Mentor and on our website at traveltherapymentor.com. For those that may or may not know us that well, Jared and I are both traveling physical therapists. We've been physical therapists and traveling therapists since 2015 when we graduated, and we started right away as traveling therapists as new grads. So it's been about 4.5 years now that we've been travel therapists, and we've taken a lot of assignments over those 4.5 years, and we've learned a lot in our time. So as Jared mentioned, every week we bring you travel therapy videos about different topics. There's some overlap, but we try to bring you guys new information and educate you based on what we've read and learned and gathered from our times as travel therapists. So as Jared mentioned, tonight what we're going to talk about in particular is avoiding bad job environments, because we've definitely heard and learned that a lot of people end up in really crappy environments as a travel therapist, and a lot of people say like, oh, there's a reason why they need travelers there, and it's not a good place to work. There's the reason why no permanent therapist will take a job there, and that kind of thing. So we want to kind of dispel some of those myths and let you guys know that we have had some good experiences and how you guys can find them too. As Jared also mentioned, next week we're going to be bringing to you a video that we're going to record tomorrow with Joe Smith from Travel Tax, and that video is going to be all about filing taxes as a travel therapist, maintaining a proper tax home, kind of protecting yourself against an audit as a travel therapist, making sure you're kind of minding all your P's and Q's as a travel therapist as far as taxes go. So we had posted on our page, if you guys have particular tax questions that you would like for us to ask tomorrow when we're with Joe Smith from Travel Tax, we'd be happy to do that. So just leave us any questions that you have about that, and then we'll be bringing you that pre-recorded video next week in lieu of our live video next week. And then in addition to that, we also recently did a giveaway. Last week we announced that we were doing a giveaway of a book that we think is a really wonderful book. It's called the Choose FI, Your Blueprint to Financial Independence book, that is written by a fellow physical therapist, Chris Mamula, and two guys that run the Choose FI podcast, FI standing for Financial Independence, which is something that Jared's really into, and myself as well. So this evening, we announced the winners of our giveaway. So congratulations to the 3 winners of the book that we're giving away. It's Laura Fleck, Dave Balzer, and Colleen O'Donnell. So thank you to everyone who participated, everyone who followed our page. We really appreciate you guys. And even if you guys were not the winners, we do recommend that you check out that book.
Yes.
We have no affiliation with that book. We just thought it was a really good book, and it has a lot of good information brought to you guys by a fellow fellow physical therapist, as well as some people who are in the financial independence community. It's a really good book for anybody who's interested in improving their financial situation.
Yep.
So
out of over 100 books on finances that I've read, that's my favorite one so far. So definitely check it out.
Yeah. So that's a little bit about what's going on with us. I see that a few of you guys are signing on tonight to watch our video about avoiding bad job environments as a traveler. If you're on and watching, we would love if you would say hi in the comments and let us know who you are. I see Ryan is on. Hi, Ryan. Thanks for joining us. If anybody else is watching, if you just want to say hello, if you want to let us know who you are, if you're a therapist, if you're a student, if you're a traveler, let us know. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and if you guys have any perceptions about like the environment that travel therapists usually go into, let us know, because I know a lot of people usually have this perception that, you know, the facilities that travelers go into are usually bad facilities, or there's a reason they need travelers, and sometimes that is the case, but it's not always the case. So I just want to know what you guys think about traveling and that experience that goes along with it.
And we really heard that starting as new grads in 2015. We knew some people who had traveled as new grads, but I don't think it was quite as common 4 years ago. And now it's getting more and more common. We talk to new grads all the time, and we definitely heard like, oh, you're going to get in some really bad situations. And we've had our handful of bad situations, but through our experiences, just learning how to handle those situations is what we want to share with you. And then also trying to kind of weed out the bad situations before you ever get there. So hi, Bob. Thank you for joining us. Hey, Suzanne, Travel OT here. Thank you, Suzanne. And hey, Josie, Ryan. Okay, so we are going to jump into our topic tonight. So, Jared, so kind of talking about bad job environments. So, how do we avoid hopping into bad job environments? The number one thing that you have to do is you have to try to rule out these bad situations during your phone interview with the facility, because otherwise it's really hard to know. Your recruiter often just has the facility name, the location, the start date. They may not know anything about the clinic, and your recruiter is not a therapist. Your recruiter is not a clinician.
Yeah.
They can't tell you if it's going to be a good job or a bad job. You have to find out in your interview if it sounds good or not.
There are situations where the recruiter may have had a traveler there in the past, and they might have some insight from that traveler, how they did. But yeah, a lot of times the recruiter's not going to know really anything about the job except the list of things. What's the facility, like what type of facility, where is it, how many weeks, what the pay is, those kind of things. That's what they know. So when you interview for these jobs, you really have to ask the tough questions to the hiring manager.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this in the past, how those interviews go, but you need to be prepared for that. David says that he has his first phone interview tomorrow. So
good luck, David.
Yes, good luck. Be prepared, because the interviews are almost never interviews that you would expect it to be for a job. They're usually not asking. We just did an interview not long ago for an assignment that Whitney's going to be taking in 3 weeks, and the interview was nothing about us. It was all just trying to sell us the clinic, and that's usually how it is. So you need to go in with a list of questions to ask, because if you don't, basically what will happen is the manager will tell you about their clinic. They won't ask the questions that you normally think that they're going to ask. So most of the time when we're preparing for interviews, it's like, how am I going to answer these questions? But usually you don't get a lot of questions. So it's up to you to ask the important questions.
Yeah.
And so go in with a list. And like I said in the past, even all these job interviews we've done, phone interviews, I still go in with a list every time of questions and write out the answers, because if I don't, I'll forget things.
Yeah, you're inevitably going to forget. We'll tell you a little bit about the recent job interview that we did. We actually did the interview together. It doesn't always happen that way, but it did this particular time. We were on the phone together, and literally the first 30 minutes, this ended up being a really long one. They're not
an hour and 15-minute interview.
This ended up being a really long one, and it wasn't because the guy was grilling us with questions. It actually ended up being a really long one because Jared and the director that we were talking to had some things in common, and they just kept talking and talking and talking, and I kept thinking, when are we going to get around to talking about the clinic? But most of the time they're pretty brief and they're pretty quick, and they just mostly want to know maybe a couple questions about you. Oh, do you have experience in this setting in the past? When can you start? And they're just trying to get you to come there.
Yeah.
But this one ended up being really long, and Jared and him ended up having some things in common. Oh, you went to college there? Oh, I went to college near there. And oh, you grew up there? Oh, I grew up there. Oh, interesting. What about that one place? And it was really
Managers
funny.
love that. If you can, they want you to be personable, especially if it's a manager you're working with. So if you can carry on a conversation, that goes a long way. Even they're not going to know much about your clinical skills from an interview like that anyway. So they want to make sure you're a normal person that they can talk to.
Yeah, and every single one is different. We've never had
everyone's
an interview that
different.
was the same.
And in comparison, earlier this year we had an interview at this clinic that I think the manager talked for about 3 minutes about the clinic and then said, "All right, you guys have any questions?"
When can you start?
Yeah, when can you start? Do you have any questions? And that was it. So if we didn't have a list of questions prepared to ask, it would have been, that was over after 3 or 4 minutes. So
yeah.
You have to have those questions ready, and you have to have, and we've written articles about this. We can put the link to the article in that in the comments later. But yeah, we've written articles about which questions to ask, and you have to have those prepared ahead of time.
Yeah. So just to give you a little bit of background, as far as like we've had some good clinics, we've had some bad clinics. A couple of the bad ones that we had were some of the skilled nursing facilities we were in, and I think the mistake that we made during those is we maybe didn't delve in enough on asking our questions up front to know. One of the worst experiences I ever had was my very first contract as a new grad, and I kind of got lulled into this sense of comfort because the manager was so reassuring that it was a great place and it was going to be fine and everything was going to be good. So I came out of that interview thinking this is going to be great. And then when I got there my first day, it was nothing like what I thought it was going to be. And one mistake that I made with this one is the person that I interviewed with was actually the regional manager. And this has happened to us a few times where I didn't actually speak with the person who was going to be my direct supervisor in the clinic. So the regional manager for some of these facilities is not in the clinic directly all the time. They may not really know and have a clear picture of what goes on there. So sometimes that's okay, but sometimes it's not. The job that I just interviewed for the other day that I'm actually going to be starting, that's kind of a little bit of an announcement. We're going to be going to North Carolina for our next job.
Back to North Carolina.
In about 3 weeks.
I think that's about our 5th time in North Carolina now.
I know, we keep saying we're going to go out west, but it hasn't happened so far.
North Carolina's a good state. It's very convenient for us.
So I'm going to be starting this job in North Carolina, and this is one of the first times that we're going to go ahead and take it, even though I am the only one who has a position at this time, and Jared, they only have one position available at the time. So Jared's not going to have one right now. But
that is not at all common. I want to let you guys know that our travel pairs, we've never done that in the past, and the only reason we're doing it this time is because I don't really need a job. I basically could just find PRN work in the area and be fine. So that's probably what I'm going to do is either find PRN work or work on the website. So it's not because we couldn't find 2 jobs. It's because that really wasn't a priority at this time.
And the big reason was we told our recruiters this go round that we would agree to do one job if it was a good job, and it seemed like a good situation, and the pay package was right, and the area was low cost of living, which is what we wanted, and this job actually ended up being all of those things. So we decided it was a good enough job for us to move forward, and Jared's going to plan to work on the website, maybe pick up a PRN in the area, but that's just because Jared is in a place with his financial independence journey where he can do that. But
yeah, and I guess we could talk about a little bit about the pay package that Whitney's getting and that assignment in itself, because just to let you guys know like what jobs we look for. We were skeptical going into this interview because it was a facility that has a hit or miss reputation. Some clinics are good, some clinics are not good. So we interviewed for it, and it was wonderful. The regional manager that we talked to said that it's 45 minutes one-on-one sessions. It's an outpatient clinic, which we wanted. The pay is going to be over $1,850 a week after taxes in a rural place in North Carolina, which is a lot of money for that area. So very good pay, really good sounding job in terms of patient population, one-on-one treatments, all that stuff. So it sounds really, really good. It's a job that we would think about accepting if it was a permanent job. If we wanted to settle down, that's what we'd be looking for. And all of our travel jobs, we try to do that since we, like Whitney said, she had a bad experience in the beginning, but we learned a lot from that. And that's why we started helping other people so they don't have these bad experiences. But that's what we're always looking for, is we're looking for jobs that we would accept if we were going to take a permanent job. We're not just going into these travel assignments and willing to accept a bad situation.
Yeah. So like Jared said, this clinic is kind of interesting. It's an outpatient clinic, and it's a sort of like a chain. It's a kind of local on the East Coast, a chain therapy place. So you never know if one is going to be the same as the other. So like an example of that out west could be like, I don't know, Kaiser or something. Like you never know if one Kaiser clinic is going to be the same as the other. I'm not going to go and say the name of this one that I'm working at, but anyway, you never know if one's going to be the same as the other, and it ended up being a great one. This one is 45 minutes one-on-one. I'm so excited because if any of you are physical therapists and you've worked in outpatient, you know that that's not the norm. You know that there are so many mills out there where in an 8-hour day, some people are seeing 20 and 30 patients a day, double books and overlapping on the half-hour evals, all this awful stuff that you hear about in the PT world. And it might be the same for some OT and speech therapist outpatient, although I don't think they do as much overlapping and double booking in OT and speech just because of the nature of the work they're doing. But in PT, definitely like some really bad experiences, and everybody's really like, oh, that's just the norm. That job that Jared said we interviewed for earlier in January was for an outpatient clinic in Arizona, and they were like, oh, 30-minute evals, 30-minute treats, overlapping, double booking. He was like, but it's just the norm. You'll see between 15 and 20 patients a day, it's fine. And we were like, nope, not the norm, not for us.
Not the norm for us.
Turn that down 100%.
And so it makes me really sad because, especially in the PT world, there's this perception that travel outpatient jobs are hard to come by, which it depends on the area, may or may not be true. It has not been true for us. We've had almost all outpatient. And that if you do find an outpatient job, that you're just expected to see a lot of patients. And that is also has not been the norm for us. So I just recently, basically the impetus for this video is that I saw a unfortunate comments about travel outpatient jobs for physical therapists that were saying that they were being triple and quadruple booked on the 30-minute. And people were acting like, oh yeah, that's normal, travel outpatient, that's just how it is. No. But that is not normal. It can be normal if you let it be, but that is not normal for us. And that's a situation that you can avoid if you just are selective about the clinic. You ask the right questions. You turn those jobs down. Like, we need to be turning down all those jobs. It doesn't matter how high the pay is. You could pay me twice as much as I make on a normal contract, and I would not take a job that's triple and quadruple booking patients.
Yeah,
so
it's nuts.
So no one should be taking those jobs, and that should not be the perception for outpatient travel PTs, is that you're just going to be seeing 30 people in a day. That's not normal.
So I want to dive into some questions that we do ask during the interview to be able to rule out some of these clinics. But before I do that, I want to mention a little bit about what Jared was talking about turning down those jobs. So as we always talk about in all of our videos, and when we're educating you guys, is there's basically three main factors you have to consider when you're choosing a travel therapy job. One is the setting, one is the location, and one is the pay. So if you are saying that I only want outpatient and I only want it to be in San Diego and I only want it to pay $1,900 or more a week, you're going to have really very few job options. You're probably not going to get all three criteria exactly what you want. You have to be a little bit lenient on one or the other. So I find a lot of people that are like, I really want to be in this region and I really want to be in outpatient, and then they end up settling more on the pay and just sort of taking whatever. Or they end up settling more on whatever the clinic sounds like. So if you're somebody that you absolutely, for whatever reason, have to be in one location and you find a job there and it doesn't sound great, but it sounds doable, it depends on what your priorities are. There are certain people that will take these 30-minute eval, 30-minute whatever, overlapping, double booking jobs, and that's your prerogative, whatever is really important to you. But you also have to understand those are the situations where you're going to be pressured to work off the clock. You're going to be pressured to do documentation at home on your own time. You're going to be pressured to bill unethically. So if you sign up for that knowingly, then you also have to accept the consequences. But if you are more flexible on where you're able to go, or you're really willing to just say no and pass on that job and look for something else, then you're going to get into better situations and better job environments.
Yeah, and in terms of those three factors that Winnie talked about, our priority is always outpatient first. Then we're pretty lenient on location. We'll pick one or two states, but we're pretty lenient on the location in those states, which is usually a good thing. And then we're pretty lenient on pay. We don't have to have the highest pay. We want fair pay, but we don't want, we don't need the highest pay. So after, as long as it's an outpatient clinic, we don't care what the pay is if it's a bad situation. So we're going to turn those jobs down. And I think that especially for new travelers, it's much more important to find a good clinic situation than it is to find a specific location or the highest pay. Yeah. So I would really, anyone that's getting ready to start traveling, I would really urge you guys to spend extra time finding a good clinic situation for you and be more flexible on those other factors, at least until you get more comfortable with traveling or with being a PT or OT or whatever your discipline is.
Yeah, because you really want to have a good experience as your first job out of school. You don't want to get burnt out. You don't want to get burned about travel and think travel is just not for me. You don't want to get into an unethical or an illegal situation and put your license or the patient's well-being at risk by being in a bad situation and trying to keep up when you know you can't keep up. So even if it means you have to take a more rural assignment, even though you really wanted a big city, just be a little bit more lenient so you can find the right fit for your first job, or even if it means that pay package is a little bit lower. You know, you're getting dazzled by all these people saying, wow, $1,800 a week, yada yada. But don't always go for the highest pay on your first couple jobs. Go for the clinic that sounds right to you.
Yeah, get the good experience and then go from there.
So going back to talking about in the interview, when you get set up for the job interview with the facility, how you can try to weed out if it's a good job or not. Rachel asked a great question, and I was going to talk about this anyway. Rachel wants to know, if you interview with the regional director instead of the local clinic director, do you ask to speak with someone that works in the clinic before you accept?
This is very dependent on the situation. There are situations where if we talk to the regional director and they don't have a lot of information about the clinic, which happens because say they, for example, I interviewed with a guy that had 20-some clinics under him. He doesn't know the specifics about the clinic I'm going to be in. So yeah, I would want to talk to someone in the clinic there first before I accepted the job. If it's, you know, a smaller scale situation, which I think this one we interviewed with, he just started there. I think he might have 4 or 5 clinics under him. He knew everything about the clinic. He knew the staff there. He knows the scheduling there. He knows all that stuff. So in that situation, no, wouldn't he accepted the job without talking to someone in the clinic.
Yeah.
But if it's at all a situation where you're in doubt or things sound fishy or anything like that, you do want to talk to somebody in the clinic, because then you can compare what they say. And if there's a big discrepancy in what they're saying, that is a bad sign. That's a red flag. And we'd probably turn that job down. So it's very dependent on the situation. But yes, if you have any hesitancy about taking the job, ask to speak to either the clinic manager or someone in the clinic, and then ask the same questions of them.
Yeah, and we've heard people get burned by this before. We recently were mentoring and talking to a new graduate back in May, and he interviewed with the regional director, and the job sounded great, and he was really excited. It was his first job. And then he gets to the clinic, and the local director is telling him something completely different. His schedule is completely different than what they agreed upon. And in a little bit, we're going to talk about what happens if you were told one thing and you get there and it's something different. But let's dive into what questions we asked during the interview to try to determine if it's a good clinic or not. So the first thing I want to know usually is, what kind of staff is on site? Yeah,
you want to know what other, how many people of your discipline are there. If you're a new grad, we always recommend that you are not the only one of your discipline there, especially if you're an evaluating therapist, because you don't want to go into a situation where there hasn't been a permanent therapist there for a couple weeks, and there's like a backup of evals and discharges, and it's a bad situation to walk into. So you want there to be at least one other permanent person there. But, you know, asking about techs, that's a very important thing, especially for an outpatient clinic, because it might be possible to see a patient every 30 minutes and have them overlap if there's 1 or 2 techs that are able to help you. But if there's not, that makes it a lot different. It's a lot harder. So you definitely want to know about support staff, front office people, techs, how many assistants you're expected to manage if you're an evaluating therapist, because that changes the dynamic completely. If you go into a clinic where you have 4 assistants that you're working with, you might only be doing evals, progress notes, and discharges, which for some people they might enjoy that, but for me that's pretty miserable. So I want to know those things.
Yeah. So ask about the staff that's on site, who's going to be there if you have questions. It's really helpful if you have if you're a PT, another PT, if you're an OT, another OT, etc. So that way if you have questions, they're the ones that can answer it best. If your DOR, if your director is some other discipline, they may not be able to answer your physical therapy questions or your speech therapy questions or that sort of thing.
The next big thing is productivity. So that will depend on setting, but like we talked about with outpatient, how many patients are expected, or how often are patients scheduled? And then once you know how often patients are scheduled, is it every 30 minutes, 45 minutes, every hour? Then do you double book? And if so, how often? Some people are okay with double booking. We would be okay with it if it's like 45-minute sessions, and you know you're not going to have multiple in a day. So say there was two double books a day, and then there were 45-minute sessions. I would probably be okay with that. So it's on a case-by-case basis. The other thing is what the patient mix. So things like, is it primarily Medicare? Is it, private insurers? Is it workers' comp? Asking those questions will give you some more insight into the clinic and how billing is going to be with that schedule that you would have.
Yeah. So a follow-up to that would be, if it sounds like it's kind of a hectic clinic or it might be kind of busy, maybe follow up and ask the person you're interviewing with, how does your staff organize their day? Are they able to accomplish, direct point of service documentation with the patients? Are they able to get all their evals and their treatment notes typed within their 8 hours or whatever your normal scheduled hours are for that day? Are they able to multitask pretty well? Is it set up in such a way that they can accomplish this? or are you finding that they're staying late, that they're taking their notes home? This is kind of a delicate thing. I don't always ask that outright, but if it sounds fishy, I might say, you know, how's the documentation system? Is it pretty easy to catch on to? Is it pretty user-friendly? How long does it take you, if you're an evaluating therapist, to type in eval, that sort of thing? And every now and then we'll hear this thing, especially in outpatient, where they'll say, oh, well, you know, you can take your laptop home and you can do your notes at home. We're fine with that. That's what a lot of our therapists do. And so, you know, if we hear that, that's kind of red flag to us, because as travel therapists, we are hourly employees. So we don't plan on ever taking our laptops home and doing paperwork outside of our scheduled 40 hours. So if they're encouraging that already on the interview and saying that's what you're going to more or less be expected to do, they're saying it in a nice way, like you can do that, but they're kind of saying like you should and you will do that. Yeah. That's sort of a red flag for us, and that's usually a job we'll turn down.
Exactly.
So to give some more specific examples of what we would ask if it was like a certain setting or not, Jared already kind of mentioned if it was outpatient, it's kind of, are there double books? Are there overlapping patients? Because sometimes, say if they were only 30-minute sessions, does that mean they only keep the people 30 minutes? Maybe they only keep them there 30 minutes and they just want you to build 2 units with that one. And then when the next one gets there, that one leaves and then you build 2 units with the next one. But typically what we see, it's more like they're scheduled on the half hour, but they're expected to be there for an hour, which means they want you billing 4 units. And then if they say it's primarily Medicare population, then you have to question, okay, is that ethical and legal if I'm overlapping and double booking these Medicare patients? So you have to sometimes delve into some of these harder questions. And I'm telling you, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you feel like you sound annoying. There's so many times where we've done like an interview together and Jared would have just been like, okay, sounds good, bye. And I'm like, but I have another question. And they're trying to get you off the phone like, all right, when can you start? And it's like, but can you answer my questions before you go? Because you need to know this stuff. Otherwise, you might want to turn the job down.
Yes.
So the other thing that we've run into is like if you're asking about support staff, this seems small, but does the front desk do the scheduling in outpatient or do you do the scheduling?
That is a very, very good question because we've had both situations and it's almost 50-50, I feel like, at the clinics I've worked at. And you don't realize how much extra time it can take to schedule people because people, it's never easy, especially with older people. They have other appointments. Like, it would be great if it was like, okay, we'll do Tuesday, Thursday, 5 o'clock forever, but it's never that way. It's like, well, I have this going on, and well, I can come early that day, but I can come late this day. And sometimes it'll take an extra 15 minutes of a session to schedule out a few weeks. So yeah, that is very important because if you're you're basically overlapping patients, you have 2 there and you're trying to schedule, that is a nightmare. I've been in situations like that where I was very, very unhappy with that setup.
I can think of 2 different clinics that we worked at that were hospital-based outpatient, and they were one-on-one for an hour, and that was wonderful and it sounded great. But guess what? They didn't have techs and they didn't have anybody to schedule. So even though you had a full hour with your eval, you always had to allow ample time at the end because you were the one scheduling them. So you couldn't keep them the full hour because otherwise you wouldn't have time to finish your note and get the next patient started. There was no one to help set your next patient up on the bike or a modality or anything like that. There was no tech or no person to pass them off to do the scheduling. And so even though it was one-on-one for an hour, I still felt pushed for time at times. I said time way too many times in that sentence.
That was too much.
Anyway, so just some little things to think about if you're sort of trying to get all the nitty gritty.
Yeah, and along with that scheduling, you want to ask, kind of Whitney hinted at this, how many units per person? Because if it's a primarily Medicare clinic and you know that they have overlapping patients every 30 minutes, then they shouldn't expect you to be billing 4 units per person because something's wrong there. If you have an overlapping Medicare patient, you might be able to bill 3 units depending on what the insurance is before and after. But in most cases, you're going to bill 2 units. So you need to get an idea of how they feel that billing should be done. So how many units, and those two factors, how many units they expect per patient, and then the schedule that how they schedule the patient should give you some idea on how ethical they are in terms of their billing.
Yeah. So another example, if you were someone who is taking a home health contract, so all these things in outpatient aren't going to apply to you. Some questions that we would want to know during an interview for home health is, how does their point system work? So how many points do you receive? How many points do they expect in a week or a day? How many points do you receive for a treatment versus the start of care versus an eval versus a progress report versus a discharge? And hopefully, the majority of companies you're going to work with are going to weigh the start of cares and the evaluations and those sort of things higher, so that hopefully you won't need to get as many visits in a day if you have to account for all that extra documentation that comes with the start of care. And you want to weigh out those points and see if it sounds like a reasonable number of points and a reasonable expectation for you.
Yeah, another big thing in home health is how big is the territory you're covering, because there's situations where if you're not doing starter cares and you have a small territory, you might be able to see 6 people in a day. But there's also situations where if you have one starter care per day and you're driving 100 miles, that you have no chance of even seeing 5. So it really depends, and you want to know how big the area is that you're going to have to drive in, and what's the average mileage that you're going to be driving per day.
Yeah. Now, if you had a different setting, such as a SNF, this is going to be a totally different set of questions. So a skilled nursing facility, one thing I've thought and realized that you need to ask after having a couple bad experiences is, how big is the facility? So some facilities I've worked at are multiple buildings. And this is going to really eat into your productivity if you have to go from one building to another. I worked at a place that was a big retirement community, and I actually had to drive between buildings, and they had no way of accounting for your productivity when you drove from one building to another. They had no way of accounting for that time in and time out on your schedule, and so my productivity was horrible.
It's almost like doing home health in a skilled nursing facility.
Yeah,
so
it was awful.
You're basically seeing home health patients, but expected to have SNF productivity of like 90%, which is pretty much impossible to do.
So think about how big the building is, how much area you're having to cover. Think about even at a big one building facility for skilled nursing, are you having to go from unit to unit? Are you having to go transport the patients yourself? Rarely they'll have a tech or a person to assist with transporting, but sometimes it's worth asking. It's worth at least bringing up, because sometimes when you bring up these things, it gets the DOR or whoever you're interviewing with talking about it, and you can get a better feel for the facility.
Exactly.
If you just get a feel for how it's flowing, like what about when I have to go get patients and nursing has them or another discipline has them, yada, 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 and just get a feel for, what if my productivity is low one week? Are you going to fire me? Kind of get a feel for what they say.
Yeah, so many times in our interviews, we get more information from those little in-between conversations than we do from the direct questions themselves. Because you get a glimpse of what their thought process is. And they might say something like, no, why would you need a tech? They're always ready to go in their room. And so maybe that's true, but usually that's not true. So you might have someone that has unreasonable expectations there. They might be thinking, oh, you just go get the person out of the room, you can bill right away. And that's not always the case. So you can learn things like that just with those little conversations.
Yeah, and along with that, I've worked at some facilities where they actually had therapy as a priority, and they had it scheduled in the patient's schedule for the day. And it didn't always work out, but for the most part, you would just go to the room and you'd say, look, it's 11, we have your therapy scheduled at 11, and they would take the patient right then, but not always. Something else to think about in skilled nursing is, are you having any way of doing point of service documentation? Do the permanent staff and do the travel staff receive like an iPad or a tablet to be able to do point of service? Or are you having to go all the way back into the room to type on a laptop or type on I've worked on a desktop computer at a skilled nursing facility with patients that are max assist. So you have to literally leave the patient, you're done with them, and you go sit at the computer, the desktop computer, and type. And so imagine how that would hurt your productivity. So these are some things to ask.
So the last thing we're going to get into is what would happen if you go to a clinic and it's not what you expected, not what the manager said, and how you would handle that.
So real quick, my phone's actually about to die, so I'm going to plug it in real quick, and you might be able to see the cord, but that way we can continue with you guys. I didn't do a good job of charging my phone beforehand. Yeah,
and real quick, so before we get into that, if you guys could like this video, if you're getting value from it, I saw Suzanne said that she asked a lot of these same questions too, which is great. The more informed we can be as travelers, the better. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them. If you could like this video so more people see it, leave us comments. That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. So
okay, we're all plugged in now.